It is my absolute delight to introduce Rob Hopkins, whom I'm sure many of you know of. Rob is a gardener, a writer, a blogger, a father. He's also the co-founder of the Transition Town Totnes and also of the Transition Network. But moreover than that, he's the author of the Transition Handbook, which changed my life about nearly 3 years ago. I think it was February, so 2.5 years ago. It had actually landed in my local bookshop the day I walked in and was piled up on the table, the front table. They were just unpacking it. And I bought one, took it home, and stayed up all night reading it. And I was so galvanized. And that excitement within me, knowing that this was important and that it was going to change the world, that I got straight onto the phone to my dear chum, David Strawn, who is mentioned in the book, and begged him to give me Rob's phone number and email. And as a result, I got in touch and we met. And I said, look, we need to bring this to London. And in fact, we already had it starting in Brixton here. And I then hosted an event in Conway Hall 2 years ago where Transition Towns comes to London. Out of that, I think we've spawned, but I may be wrong, I think it's 29 transition towns here in the Greater London area. And I'm absolutely delighted to look over the past 2 years and see how much has happened. Very often we forget how much does happen over a very short period of time. So without saying anything else, I want to invite Rob up to the stage and ask you to give a good round of applause. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. I wonder how many people here are involved in a transition project where they live? Okay. And how many people is this just totally new? You've turned up tonight not really quite knowing what it's all about. Okay, very good. So just before I start, there was just one thing that I wanted to pick up on that Michael said in his presentation, where he said that peak oil was something that was maybe 30 or 40 years away. The International Energy Agency report that came out this year, after they've spent the last 20 years in every report saying peak oil, what a load of nonsense, and only really miserable doomy guts talk about peak oil. This year's one says, just in one little sentence, the peak in conventional oil production, which happened in 2006, moving on. And so then what they do is they spend the rest of the report trying to convince you that the unconventional oils, the tar sands that Michael talked about, the other the deep water oil, these kind of things, are going to be able to fill the gap, in spite of them saying that conventional oil production is now depleting by about 8% a year. And the way they get around the line on the graph not doing that is by having this fantastic bright blue wedge called oil fields yet to be discovered. Which is a huge thing, and it grows and grows and grows, and it magically grows at exactly the same rate that it needs to grow in order for the line to not start going downwards. So I'm going to move on, assuming everybody is largely familiar with peak oil, largely familiar with climate change, and just give you a sense of where transition comes from on all of this. Because I think when we talk about peak oil and when we talk about climate change, there's something about the term peak oil that's very useful, but also slightly leaves us off at a not very useful tangent. And I would think that when we do that, we look at it like this, that actually what we have is this mountain. We've spent 150 years valiantly climbing up to the top of this mountain, and now we stand, in effect, on top of this mass of energy that we've consumed, those of us in the West anyway, who can now see further than anyone's ever seen before. We have all this amazing stuff at our disposal. But then when we look at it like that, then actually navigating a safe way down the other side, the analogy I like to use is it's like trying to persuade a child at the end of a birthday party who's had too much cake and too much lemonade, and they're all completely cranked up on sugar, that it's time to go home. So it becomes the kind of transition that Michael was talking about as a society is like trying to get an overexcited, grumpy child home after a birthday party. And it's a move away from something. You're taking them away from the party, which is where they want to be. But what we do in transition is we flip that upside down. And we say, actually, what would it be like if we looked at the oil age as being like a deep, dark, fetid lagoon we dived into in about 150 years ago because somebody told us that if only we could go deeply enough, there was all this gold and like Inca gold thrown in at the bottom of the lagoon. And as we've dived deeper and deeper, more and more indicators on us have said this really isn't a good idea, climate change being the most obvious one, but also the fact that we are now the most indebted people there has ever been, that now that consuming more stuff failed to make us any happier in about 1961. And also the deeper we've gone, the darker it's gone, and the harder it's become to see each other. And we're now down at the bottom in the gloom. We can't see the people around us. We're rootling around. There must be something down here that's going to make us happy. But when you look at it like that, then actually the move away from oil dependency isn't a move away from something. It's a move towards something. It's a move back towards being able to see each other again as we start to come up to the surface. It's a move back towards fresh air and sunshine and reconnecting. And that, for me, is how we look at it at this stage going forward, that actually there's a huge opportunity to move towards something here. And there's also what Sharon Astick, who's a blogger who I admire enormously, calls the theory of anyway, which is actually if somebody came tomorrow and was able to completely prove that peak oil was a load of rubbish and there were hundreds of years worth of cheap energy left, and they were able to prove that the climate scientists had got the 2 decimal points in the wrong place and actually everything was grand, actually most of us who are doing this work would be doing it anyway because we feel better doing it, we feel better connected. I was in Lancaster a while ago with meeting people in Transition City Lancaster, and the guy said, do you know, he took me to one side and said, do you know the thing I love most about this? I know 200 people I didn't know a year ago. It's fantastic. And there's a reconnecting of people, and you know, I spent years teaching permaculture, teaching people how to grow food. No one ever came back to me and said, I was doing all right until you taught me how to grow food. Everything just went downhill all the way. Once I knew how to build a straw bale wall, it was over, you know. Actually, there is something about reconnecting, about learning to use your hands again, all this kind of stuff that's really, really important, I think.